Warning. Portions of the following video contains coarse language which may not be suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Avertissement. Il y a des parties de la vidéo suivante concernant langage grossier. Ce ne peut pas être approprié pour quelque audience. On conseille discrétion de le téléspectateur.
You know we have a warrant here, so how can you help her?
By supporting
Or are
her.
you encouraging her to be defiant to police?
By supporting her.
So how are you supporting her right now?
I support my child.
Says.
Yeah, and I know that you guys have lied and done everything you can to interfere with my relationship with my daughter. You've done everything that you can to interfere, and you're going to take her out of here against her will.
But right now, this is the first step, okay?
Too fucking
This is gonna
bad.
happen, okay?
Then you're taking her against her will.
And acting like this is not gonna help your case, right?
Then you're taking her against her will.
She's gonna have to go for a couple of days. You're gonna have your court
No,
date.
I'm not going to. No fucking
Listen,
group home.
listen,
He's
Listen.
calling your mother, not you, Kristen.
okay?
And
And you need to keep your mouth closed for a couple minutes so we can have a conversation.
if I want to say something, I will. And she was.
Right? And
She
she will.
guys
And she will.
fucked it
Stop
up.
talking, okay?
Don't
So,
fucking wave shit at me.
anyways, you can go to court with all this information, right? And then you can try to get your child back. That's a step. But right now, she's gonna have to come with us. I know it's unfortunate. I know you don't want to. But that's also a step to getting her back.
No.
Okay?
You're not 16 yet. You don't get.
I don't give a shit if I'm not 16.
All this is going to be documented on how cooperative you are. How do you think the Justice of the Peace is going to look at it? That we had to have 2 police officers and 3 CAS workers come here and sit here
You
for
guys
2
didn't
hours. Stop
have to.
talking. I'm not talking to you. Okay? I'm talking to your mom.
So,
Okay?
what's your
I've
point?
had
And I
enough
have
of your
a say.
language, and I've had enough of you yelling at me. Okay?
And
You
I
just
have a
came
say.
in. You're coming into my house and you're ripping my child out of her home.
I understand
You don't
that.
expect her to have something to say?
This is just amazing, unbelievable. Here is this young girl that they're trying to take away from her mother, rip her away. She doesn't want to go. But here's the Children's Aid Society of Canada, 2 of their social workers and 2 police trying to get this girl out, as you've seen in the video. She's protesting. She's screaming. She does not want to go because there's no issue. Now, common sense tells you quite quickly that if the child thought they were in danger or they weren't being looked after, the last place that they'd want to be would be with their parent. And that was quite obvious in the video. She protested. They wouldn't listen to her. The social worker and the police refused to listen to her. Isn't that something? And furthermore, they pointed to the mother and they basically told her, if you can't convince your daughter to come with us, we're going to hold you responsible. You are responsible for your daughter. The daughter is saying, look, I've got a say in this. And never mind, they didn't pay any attention. Well, anyway, hi, I'm André Faust. And the question we're going to look at today is that how is it possible that child protection agencies can do the inverse to what they try to do? Protect children is what they try to do, but in fact, they actually become an instrument for abuse. That's right, they become an instrument for abuse. My first experience with child services, I don't know what it was called back in the 90s. It was there were some names. Now we call it Department of Social Services, blah, blah, I don't know. But that's really not important. Back in 1991, I had a woman come and approach me. I did already have a reputation as being an advocate activist. And she come to me totally distraught, and she said, André, they took away my children. And I'd asked her, I said, well, why? What happened? Did you abuse them? Did you hit them? Did you do anything? Was there anything out of the abnormal? And she said, no. She says, I don't quite understand why they grabbed my children from me. Anyway, I took it on. I pulled in a lawyer who ended up pulling a social worker. Well, actually, we flew a social worker in from Ontario to work on this particular case. What we found out was, on this particular case of snatch and grab, what happened was an anonymous caller called, made a complaint. Child Services did a 15-minute interview on the telephone, and that's what they based their rationale to come and snatch and grab these kids. That was it. Our investigation, we found there was no basis to the allegation. These parents were good parents. They worked hard to provide for their children, but some shit neighbor had something up their ass about this couple, so they did it anonymously, protected. You can't charge them for defamation because they're protected, right? And anyway, to make a long story short, we took the matter to court. We challenged Child Service. Now, all through this, they weren't cooperative at all with us. It was resistance all the way. But we got the matter in court, and the judge ordered them, based on the evidence that we supplied, to relinquish the children back to the parents. The day ended, the judge made the decision. We thought it was all fine. Yeah, right. They never got the children back. They were taken for a visit and then reapprehended again. So we go back into court, argue the case, and the judge is furious. The judge reprimands Child Services and says, look, I gave you an order to return those children. You didn't. And they stuttered and blah, blah, woof, woof. They're, all defensive and whatnot. And the judge, once again, Judge Montgomery, once again, told them, return the children. If you do not return the children this time, I will charge you with contempt of court. Very reluctantly, Child Services surrendered the children back to the parents. But that took almost 5 months to pull off. And it tied up myself, the lawyer, and the social worker from Ontario to get this thing done. Now, subsequent to that, another woman approached me with a very, very similar case. And anyway, I had accompanied her to 300 St. Mary's. I believe it was the 3rd floor. Anyway, I get there, and the department head comes up, and he says, Mr. Faust, you are no longer permitted on our facility. Please get out. If you don't, I will charge you with trespass. Isn't that something? And incidentally, we won that case too. But the problems that we run into in the 90s, now for today, 2017, I don't know if they still have that same practice, yanking children without notice of apprehension. I don't know. So we got to keep an open mind. Maybe, they've changed their ways and they're a lot more cautious on how they go about to arrest children. But I don't know. I just hope that they've evolved and they're no longer using that practice. Now, no one would ever argue that, if there is child abuse, violence to the child, sex violence, sexual exploitation, whatever. Yes, as a society, we have a responsibility to remove that children from that kind of danger. No questions asked. And, we can even be sympathetic, given the circumstances that child protection may have to go in without notice of apprehension and do things very quickly. No question there. We have to protect the children. But at the moment, if let's say it's a false, the facts weren't correct, an anonymous tipster just had, an issue or whatever, but the facts weren't there to support the apprehension. Well, you would think to God that they'd hand the children back. And that's all fair, but the problem we run into is even after they knew they were in the wrong, they persisted and held to their guns until we got a court order to tell them, to order them, to force them to give the children back. Now, upcoming, I have several testimonies that I've been able to retrieve. Two of them are young adults. I call them young adults. 13 to 16 is the first two, and the second is now an adult who experienced a snatch and grab from his parents. And anyway, those are upcoming. And one thing I do have to caution at this time here, when we get to the testimonies, there may be some content that might be upsetting to some of you viewers. So I would recommend, if you're a very sensitive person, I would advise you to shut the video down and walk away. Definitely I advise viewer discretion to watch and listen to these testimonies. As Family P. Clark explains in the next clip, some of the reasons to why child protections, children's aid, child services may snatch and grab a kid is due to economical reasons. So coming up, Michael P. Clark on child apprehension.
You know far more than I do, but I know cases where nothing has really happened. Then maybe someone once lost their temper or an accusation has been made, particularly this time of year. Families are just pulled apart and there's nothing that can be done.
Well, Michael, probably the most common reason for Children's Aid Society intervention relates to what they call neglect, parental neglect. And often parental neglect is as a result of poverty. So you have parents who are poor, and maybe all they need is a rent subsidy or a daycare space, something to help them. But what often happens is on the basis of tips, many of which are anonymous, the society will come in, and the first response often is to just take the child away from the parent and put them in what's called foster care. And foster care often is much more damaging than leaving the child with the parent.
Well, that was quite informative to the background to some of the reasons to why child protection will intervene or apprehend kids without really, just cause, in the sense that the child's health and safety is not an issue. What happens to these kids once they are yanked from their families and placed in either foster homes or group home, whatever the case may be? Well, the following testimonies will give a little bit of insight of what happens to some of these children once they have been yanked, ripped, torn apart from their families. First one is Sarah. Her problem was that she had some kind of issue, and the parent actually thought that maybe child services would help correct the problem that this young girl was having. It didn't turn out that way, and she'll tell you all about it. The next one is Caitlin. She wanted to be with her mother. No issues. Yoink! Into the care of Children's Aid Society. Our third one, Mr. John Campbell. Local fellow, happened here in New Brunswick. At a very young age, was yanked from his family, ripped, snatched, whatever term you want to use. The mother was good. She was doing everything in her powers. The kids were happy with, being with their mother. But child protection, seen it, a whole different story.
When I was 14, they moved me into a group home. I am a good child. I was teased in this group home for being a good person, for not getting into trouble. They were placing good people with these bad apples for no reason. They could have put me with family. They could have put me with my mother's friends. They would not allow me to see my mother, even though her and I both wanted to see one another. They hid me from her for a year. Finally, I was moved to another home, and in that home, they decided that I needed to go to the hospital for 3 weeks for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctor said I was just going through my growing stages of being a teenager. There was nothing wrong with me, and yet still they said there was something wrong. This is control. If they cannot find a problem with the parent, they must find a problem with the child.
My name is Caitlin. I have been a Crown Ward since, who knows, God, I don't even know how long. I was taken away at the age of 2. And the thing is, when that happens, you don't have a parent because they were taken away from you. And the thing is, foster care uses their past against them when you're not even involved in that. And it's just completely crazy, the stuff that they bring up that's like from like even before like you were conceived or you were even like anything.
Exactly. If you could see your mom right now, if you could go back to your mom and dad, would you?
I would go back there in a heartbeat. They are the best parents in the world. I never, ever felt like I was misunderstood. They talked to me through everything. They'd never lay a hand on me. They were honest, good people.
And you miss them?
I miss them a lot.
I'm going to get on with the story about my life in foster care. And I'm going to start right from the court procedure. In 1975, I was 8 years old. Social services, my mother was on social assistance. She barely got enough money to feed us. By the time she paid rent and everything else, there was not a lot of money left. Anyway, social services decided, well, we want to put these 4 kids in foster care. So they took my mother to court. And these so-called friends of hers, people around, the first time, they testified on her behalf. And she won. Us 4 children happy. We get to go home to our mother, who, as I remember, treated us well. Never beat us, never yelled at us, basically let us do what we wanted. And we were bad. A month later, they served her again. Mrs. Gamblin, we're taking you back to court to put your kids in foster care. All these people that testified on her behalf the first time, they suddenly not testifying on her behalf anymore. Anyway, she lost a case, and right from the court into the social worker's car we went. 3 of us did. There was a 4th one who was older. I think he was almost 16 at the time. And they didn't put him in. I think he was 14, 15, I don't know. Anyway, 3 of us went into foster care. And from there, I learned what chores were. I learned what beatings were. I felt my first beating via a wooden spoon within 30 days of being in foster care, if it was that long. So I was in Gary, New Brunswick, in case anyone wonders. I was there a couple years. And I probably got the wooden spoon probably 2-3 times a month. I probably deserved it, I don't know. My mother never beat me, but I guess I had to be corrected. I guess I was a bad child. Anyway, after a couple years, they moved me to another foster home in Porter's Cove. That's right across the river from Ludlow, New Brunswick. Just right there at the foot of the Priceville Hill. And with a family. And that got to the extreme. We were made, there was 7, I believe, of us, foster kids. We were responsible to do all the chores, the barn work, the haying, picking cranberries. We had to use the bathroom outdoors all year round. We had to walk down behind the barn, use the bathroom. It don't matter, number one, number two. You had to pee or poop. You went down behind the barn because you're a foster kid. You're not using the bathroom. Not in this house. We had to learn to knit. And I know you guys are going to chuckle at this. We had to knit our own mitts, our own socks. If we didn't knit them, we didn't get them. Plain and simple. Nothing. You knit it or you go barefoot. But I also learned how to cut a switch. I learned what the switch feels like. Many times. Many beatings. You get a woman that's probably 250, 300 maybe plus pounds, come up at bedtime and just swing that switch, you know, and hit you wherever. I can remember going to school in June, the last few weeks of school, wearing a long sleeve sweater to cover the bruises on me from a switch. To most of you don't know what that is. You've never had to go and cut a switch off of a tree and peel it instead of beside the wood stove and wait. You know, that switch staring at you all evening, maybe all afternoon and evening. So, and then when you went to bed and you thought, okay, it's all forgot, over, whatever, there she come. And she would use it. We were slaves. And if we didn't do the slavery, we even had to cook the meals. We had to do the laundry. We were kids. We were getting beat. We were doing the work that she was paid to do, which was raise us. But she didn't. She supervised. She supervised us peeling potatoes, doing the cooking, doing the laundry, cleaning the barns for their cattle, milking the cows, doing the haying, doing stupid things like picking cranberries so she could make some sort of cranberry jelly, jam, whatever it was. And she didn't make it, we did. We even had to churn the butter. And if we didn't do it, we got switched. There was no questions. It wasn't, why don't you want to do it? Because maybe you're sick. Maybe you're just having a bad day. It's, you do it. It don't matter. Maybe you're tired because you've been up early and you done chores, you went to school, you done your homework. You still got chores to do. And you go do it. During the winter months, January, February, every day we had to spend so much time outdoors, it didn't matter how cold it was. And if you refused to go out and spend that time outdoors, we got switched. We had to get the wood in. We had to split the wood. You name it. I can remember days it was so cold outside and we weren't allowed to go back in. I used to go and stand in the woodshed out of the wind. It was still cold, but I was out of the wind. Now, I was there, I'm going to say 3 years, give or take. And all the time I was in these foster homes. And my mother, my biological mother, we was allowed to go home and see her once, twice a year. And we used to have to take the SMT bus. They didn't drive us to the foster to home to visit our mother. They put us on an SMT bus, and we had to get off of the bus in Fredericton and walk across the bridge and wherever my mother was living in the cold at Christmas time. So anyway, after a couple of years in this one foster home in Ludlow, I was shipped to Upper Haynesville, Calvert Hill Road. I'm not sure what the proper name of it is. They're a Dutch family. And, you know, life was a little better. I mean, I got to admit, it was better than the first two. I wasn't getting beat. But I was always accused of stealing this, stealing that. Or, you know, stupid things. I still had chores to do, but I didn't mind. I mean, I was, you know, basically brought up to do this. I'm a slave. I'm a, you know, I must work in a cotton field, you know, with some guy standing there with a rifle and a big switch. I was accustomed to doing it. It's all I knew. After 2 foster homes of getting beaten. But as I got older and I realized, you know, these people were paid big money to look after me. They were paid big money to provide me with proper clothing. I shouldn't have had to knit my own socks. I shouldn't have had to knit my own mitts. That should have been bought for me. You know, they were paid for that. Where'd the money go? Maybe it went into the planting a tree first, got switch off. I don't know. But I went to social services back, I think it was 99, 2000, somewhere in that area. And I asked them for my file from when I was in foster care. And I guess the woman asked me why I wanted it. And I sort of said, well, you know, I think you owe me some money for all the beatings and that I took in foster care. And she said, well, we'll release your file, but most of it will be blacked out. She says, you're not allowed to see a lot of it. She says, if you want that, you have to get a lawyer. Can't afford a lawyer. I couldn't afford a lawyer today. I mean, I'd have to struggle to do it. So I will never see those records. And 6 years ago, probably 7 now, I was in a meeting. There were 7 social workers around. One of them hid in the meeting to get them to pay for my mother to go into a nursing home because she had dementia. And I swear a lot. Some people say I'm an asshole and I'm rude. But one of the workers that was chairing the meeting, she says, Mr. Gamblin, she says, we don't want you to swear like that all the time. Every other word out of your mouth is F this, F that, blah, 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 blah. I said, listen, I said, you guys raised me. I am the product of your upbringing. They almost fell on the floor. So I started naming social workers' names. They were all social workers when I was a kid. They're the ones that put me in foster care. There's a few others, but right off the top of my head, I can't remember the names. So anyway, yeah, their jaws dropped. They didn't know what to say to me. They didn't like what I had turned out to be or the way I am. They didn't like the swearing. Well, listen, you can put a kid in a foster care. You can beat them. You can force them to go to church every Sunday. But you can't change who they are. I am still my own private self. You know, I'm an individual. I'm not. Anyway, they didn't like it. I'm sure if they had my foster parents behind me, I would have got beat. They were ordered to beaten and paid them extra money to do it. Anyway, some people say I'm angry about it. I'm hostile about it. I'm hunting for an easy few dollars, but that's not the truth. I know some people, but they got money for the abuse they took in foster care. One guy got $300,000. So, in this video, I don't want to just talk about the beatings and that I took. I'd like to say thank you. I want to thank all the social workers that was involved. with me getting beaten, me having to clean barns and do hard labor for 8 years of my life. Thank God I turned 16 and I was able to get the hell out of foster care. Because by law, they could have kept me in there till I was 18. By law. And I want to thank, they're both dead now, but there was a couple named Johnny and Edna Brownlow. When I left my first foster home, it was just that period in between Christmas Day and New Year's. I left. I had no place to go. And Edna and Johnny Brownlow took me in, kept me, no money involved, kept me, fed me, gave me a place to sleep, a place to take a bath, and they kept me for a week while social services worked out how I was getting from Haynesville to Fredericton to be with my biological family. And people say, why do you want to say that? Because I do. Not only did Edna Brownlow take her time and her gas to drive me in with all the belongings that I was able to get out of my foster parents to my home, but the next day she came back into Fredericton because I had left a pair of boots at her house. She drove all the way back into Fredericton and brought these boots to me. So I want to thank, even though they're dead now, and I did go back many times and say thank you to her and her husband, I still want to say that. That was the best people I ever met. And if I hadn't been so pig-headed when I was 16 years old, I would have stayed there, finished my schooling, because I had the opportunity. Edna and Johnny offered it to me.
Now, to avoid any confusion, I'm not saying that here in 2017 that this practice is still going on of snatch and grab. I want to make that clear. I'm speaking of something that happened, in the past. And it's, like I said earlier, hopefully the departments have evolved to do things properly with ethics, considering both the child, the parent, the holistic of it, rather than do the quick snatch and grab. So why is it, when it comes to children, both police and child services agencies will sever the ties between the parent and the child, or the mother and the child, or the father and the child, when the facts and the evidence don't support that there is any kind of abuse that is taking place? And as earlier say, a simple thing like an anonymous blah 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 telephone call can in effect destroy a family. Well, in part, it's maybe because of some of the high-profile cases that we have seen. Two that come into mind is the John Ryan Turner, the 3-year-old in the Miramichi that was starved to death in, I believe, 1994. 2 years later, in 1996, Jacqueline Brewer, 28-month infant, was left alone in her crib to die of dehydration and neglect. Now, those do catch the public's attention, and yes, we want to stop that from happening. Truly, those things are horrible when you hear it. I consider myself pretty thick-skinned, and when I hear that, it gets me right here. It's just an unfortunate tragedy. And those cases, when we see those events, it doesn't only affect our own emotion personally, it affects the whole community, and we want to honestly try to find a way to keep it from happening. But reality is, you can't predict human behavior, individual human behavior. Yes, we can do statistics to predict group behavior, but when it comes to a specific individual over a course of time, we don't have the science, we don't have the math, we don't have the physics to predict individual behaviors or what they will do in the future. So, really, there isn't anything that we can do. You know, if you have, 4 cases, let's say every 30 years, well, I can safely say in the next 30 years, the likelihood there's going to be another 4 cases, regardless to what we do, regardless if it's a repeat offender or a first-time offender. Unfortunately, it's going to happen. That's one of the realities. The problem that happens is that there's a mistake of thought that happens there. It's because we think we can predict and manipulate behaviors, individual behaviors, but we can't. I could go into the reasons for it, which is beyond the scope of this videos. Quantum physics actually explains why we can't predict individual behaviors, yet we can give a fairly accurate prediction to group behaviors. But I'm not going to go there. I may leave that for another video when I'm talking about, human psychology, behavior, group behaviors, and whatnot. I think it would be very good subjects to bring up. The thing is that we know it's going to happen again. The question is when. Some of the things that we do try to, in our feeble attempts to try to prevent this from happening, we use tools like criminal records checks, the vulnerable persons sectors check, to determine what the risks are. But it doesn't matter. If the frequency is X over a certain period of time, then X will still occur, regardless to whether they've been a previous conviction or it's a first-time offender. That event will happen. It's independent of those things, and that's where we get caught up because we think that we can predict, but we can't. A lot of the cases that we see, have been screened successfully, no blemishes, nothing. Halos around their little heads when they make the application, and something happens and we have a crisis situation. Here's a recent example of what I mean by regardless of the screening technique that you use, you can't predict what a person's going to do. Here's a recent case, Old Daily Gleaner, March 17th, 2017. Not that long ago, actually. Today is what? March 26th. So this is very recent. It has to deal with a counter-terrorist RCMP who basically, well, I'll read the article. Former Mountie who tortured son apologizes. Ottawa. Facing a possible 23 years behind bars, former Mountie who tortured and starved his young son in the basement of the family's suburban Ottawa home apologized Thursday for being a monster. Well, come on, let's use some brain cells here. Let's fire them up. Let's exercise those little suckers, right? We'll get those electrons going up and down the neurons, and we'll have a party up here. That officer would have been screened incredibly in detail, more so than a typical civilian. The screening for the RCMP is just amazing. If you have a brother or even a distant relative that's had some issue, that could affect you from getting employment with the RCMP. So it's very detailed. So if these assessments and these screens are so effective, how did this guy get through? My point is that you cannot predict human behavior. The only thing that happens, and it's a negative thing, is that these checks and screenings, what these checks do is that they create a sense of false security because they're based on the wrong premise. Like I said earlier, there isn't the math, there isn't the physics, there isn't the statistics to predict individual behaviors. So to wrap this up, anyone watching this video, if you have had experiences in the past where child services pulled you out for no reasons, and I define that there was no danger to your health or safety, that the reason might have been poverty, or it may have been because of an anonymous tipster, get a hold of me. The contact information is going to be provided at the end of the video, and for those who's got a good ear and unlike me who can write, you can get a hold of me at contact@thelefteye.ca. Thank you very much for viewing, and God bless.